Have you been wondering how these six know-it-alls got together? Well, back in 2020, after 6 months of COVID-19 pandemic isolation, Barbara Brackman decided she needed some company. She invited 5 quilty friends to join her for Zoom cocktail parties every other Monday evening in order to discuss the state of the country and maybe some quilts too. So convivial were the Zooms that they decided to gather virtually every week instead of every 2 weeks. Quilt soon became the main focus of these discussions, of course. Questions were raised, pondered, and discussed, debated, and occasionally settled about particular examples that were brought to the party. Julie Silber then declared that surely the public would be fascinated by their discussions. And so the six know-it-alls, a tongue firmly in cheek name, was born. It quickly became apparent that technical help was required, so Tara Miller of the Quilt District came on board. After 3 freebie sessions, the six know-it-alls, all professional quilt historians with a combined experience of a quarter of a millennium, began to charge for the programs. We're so happy you could join us.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 16 of the Know-It-Alls. And we're delighted to have you, and we have a guest today. Some of you who were with us last month know that we visited virtually the International Quilt Museum in Lincoln, Nebraska, and had Carolyn Ducey as our guest. And this month, we are equally honored to have Katie Wood Kirchhoff. I did it, Kirchhoff, who is the curator of pre-1945 fine decorative and folk arts at the Shelburne Museum. So this time we're going to do what we did last time. Each presenter is going to pick a favorite quilt from that museum collection and give us a little presentation, and we'll kick it around afterwards. And again, we're delighted to have you, Katie, and we'll see you in a minute. Because our first presenter is Barbara Brackman, who is an independent scholar and author of many, many books. Her focus is women's history and quilts. In addition to her many books and exhibitions, she maintains a popular blog, Material Culture. And her most recent book is the 3rd edition of Encyclopedia of Pieced Quilt Patterns, published in 2020. And if you don't have it, you probably should. We all do. Barbara.
All right. Well, let me start my screen here. And wait a minute. There we go. Okay. So I picked Katie this one, and we both like it. I love it because there's so much going on in it visually, and also because it has a great story. And here is one of the captions that we see. It's a little bit pink. I think the quilt is not quite as pink as this, but it says, according to collector Florence Pito, who donated it, that it was made by a Union soldier recovering from battlefield injuries. And Florence, well, I'll talk a little bit about Florence in a minute, but she collected her quilts often from the family, and she asked for the story and she recorded it. So that's the story that she heard. And so you guys at the Shelburne for, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 years have called it your Civil War quilt. Florence published it, I think before she gave it to the museum, in her book, American Quilts and Coverlets, and told the story. And you can see from all the details, as I said, there's a lot going on here. And of course, the thing that is so striking is the rows of soldiers in the border, and they're marching, some on foot, some on horseback. And then in the center, which we're going to discuss a little more, are some women and some birds and some hearts. So there obviously is much story going on here. But what is that story? And that's what we want to find out. Now, Florence Pito, we love Florence. Joyce Gross, our mentor, bought Florence's letters when she died in the 1970s. And so we have heard them read. Irma Kirkpatrick used to read them out loud to us, and Joyce, when we were sewing at a retreat. And so we feel we know Florence very well. Here, she is a quilt dealer. I think she mainly dealt in textiles. And she at one point said she had 85 quilts in her personal collection. And they went to different museums, Newark Museum. She lived in Tenafly, is that how you say it? New Jersey. And she was quite a dealer, one of the prominent quilt dealers of her era, which was the 40s. And she also worked quite a bit with Electra Havemeyer Webb. And you can see by their birth dates that they were contemporaries. And actually, I think they had a lot in common, although Electra was quite wealthy, and Florence had to work for a living and worked hard. She wrote about quilts, she wrote books, she did magazines, and she's bought and sold them. But they look so much alike. I've been reading too much Agatha Christie, and I want to know if anyone ever saw them, both of them in the same room. Look at how their faces. So you know how you always fall in love with a face that looks like yours. So I think they probably, they spent a lot of time wheeling and dealing over these quilts. But this one wasn't sold to Electra. This one was apparently a donation. I'm going to go down here. Now, Florrie, as we call her, was working in her own time. And she knew what sold quilts. And if George Washington had slept under it, surely it was worth more. So here she is showing the New York Daily News a quilt that George Washington slept under. Now, any of us who know quilts know this quilt is probably 1860, 70, and that when George Washington was sleeping, quilts didn't look like this. And his mother made a quilt, though, but it was a whole cloth, very nicely quilted whole cloth quilt. So Flora would say anything to sell a quilt, I'm afraid. But she was operating within her time. And so I cannot criticize her too much. I always wish I could time travel and have a little talk with her about these quilts. But no time travel yet. So anyway, here's Florrie with the George Washington quilt. Now she tells us that this particular quilt that she gave to the Shelburne is a Civil War Union veterans kind of therapy after his wounds. And she's guessing it's 1870s when she first started talking about it. Now in the center, I told you there are women and birds and hearts and a little star. And she noticed right away, as everybody who drinks European chocolate knows, that the woman really bears a resemblance to La Belle Chocolatière, who is pictured on a baker's chocolate. And she was quite a trademark. Everybody knew what that was. And probably going back, I didn't see how early, but probably going back to the 1830s, 40s. But I don't think that is La Belle Chocolatière. I think it's Florence Nightingale. And here we have Florence Nightingale in a very common pose. Florence Nightingale was the woman who saved so many lives during the Crimean War, which was an English-Russian war in the 1850s. It killed just about the same number of soldiers that our Civil War killed. And many of them were terribly wounded. And at that time, the Army didn't feel it was their job to take care of people who were wounded. And so Florence started a movement to nurse soldiers. She became I'm going to move see if we can move this so you can see the lamp there. That's important. There it is. So there's the lamp. She was known as the lady with the lamp. And that lamp was so important to her image that a lot of nursing organizations use Florence's lamp as their logo. So here's Florence in many different depictions holding her lamp. And let's see. So I think, I'm going to go back here. So I think that the person who made this quilt was depicting Florence Nightingale rather than someone bringing you a cup of hot chocolate. But where was he going to get an image? And he got it right off the chocolate can. Now, the soldiers are fascinating. I was looking at the soldiers one day and I said, that's not the way you hold a gun. Those men are not holding guns. They are holding lances. Now, you've all heard of the Charge of the Light Brigade, and I hope you didn't have to watch that movie down there. But it's a romantic story of people going to their death during the Crimean War. These were British light brigades, and it was called light because their armaments were light. They weren't guns, they were lancers. And look at the way these guys are dressed. Look at those hats with the flat top. And you see the same kind of flat top on these guys. And then they're holding their lances. Here they have flags on, and here they are marching into war. It was very ineffective in modern warfare in the 1850s. So I think that the soldiers in this particular quilt are not Union soldiers. They are British lancers. Now we know a lot about English soldiers making quilts for occupational therapy while they were wounded. And here we've got a couple of pictures from Annette Giro's book on wartime quilts, and she's pretty much covered the topic. It was something that the English did for the recovering veterans of the Crimean War, was to provide them with occupational therapy, and quilts were part of it. And it's just something we didn't do in the United States. It's just not done, although you do see veterans making quilts, but not as this organized use of piecing and design to sort of as therapy. And also we have to look at the quilt and realize it's British style. It is not an American looking quilt. Now I have 3 quilts here. This one, I don't know where it came from, but it has that same kind of idea of a field of patchwork with a central focus and then a lot of borders. And it has similar shapes like these stars. But also we have 2 quilts that I could find that had very similar figures. This one belongs to the International Quilt Museum, and that might be the chocolatier holding her tray, although I think all the chocolate's on the floor by now. But it might be that someone is depicting, again, Florence Nightingale. This quilt looks to me, from all the blues and the buffs, the rainbow prints, to be 1850s during the Crimean War. We don't know much about it. It's sort of detached from its story. And here's another one down here with the house in the middle. And this one has a beautiful man on a horse, very similar to what we saw in the Shelburne's quilt. And it's also done with rainbow stripes, which is also what we see in this woman's dress, that kind of blue and buff. So my theory on this is it's not a Civil War quilt. It's a Crimean War quilt. And you can't blame Florence for not knowing, because I've seen a million more quilts than Florence ever has. She didn't have an internet. She would just go up, how she found her quilts. I would love to have gone with her, although I probably sat in the car. She would knock on doors and just go door to door and say, "Do you have any old quilts?" And then she would just sit down and talk. So I'm sure she found this one probably in her area of New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, but I think it was an import. So what do you guys say?
Wow.
It's gotten an awful lot of attention. I mean, it's been used in a lot of things.
Yes.
I mean, besides her book, on posters, on
Civil War quilt.
Yeah.
It talks.
What do you think, Katie?
I think your argument is really convincing, Barbara. I mean, so I started looking at the sort of silhouette of Florence Nightingale, and so that quilt has always looked a little odd to me in terms of its to say busyness is not quite getting it right, but there is so much that it doesn't read in the same way that many of our quilts from the Civil War era. It's almost like the pieces are too small, or there's just too much going on. And so, yeah, I think that's a really convincing argument, and also sort of makes things interesting when we think about, you know, transatlantic quilt traditions and how some things are similar, but some things really do depart.
Well, I'm glad I've convinced you, because you're the person to convince. Now you have to rewrite that caption.
I know.
But more work for you. But Julie and I one time went to the International Quilt Museum in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I think we looked at this quilt that I showed, and they were, you know, it was told it was an American quilt made in Michigan, and we just looked at it, we said, no, you know what's different is the applique is wild. It's all over the place. Americans, we would not do that. We like to confine our applique into a block.
Blocks.
They'll just explode it all over. Crazy burdens, and it's so consistent. They did do block applique, but we did not do that kind of wildness. And sometimes you think these are made to entertain children. You know, maybe the kid helped cut out the piece of fabric. So it definitely has not much of American aesthetic to it.
I'd like to look at the images of Florence Nightingale more carefully and you know, less hastily
Yes.
against the applique and look at the fashionable dress silhouette, because
Oh,
we're
yes.
talking about the 1840s here for the
Well,
Crimean
Florence
War.
was 50s because that's when the war was. In the
Okay.
1840s,
Now I got my war
Florence was
years right.
old.
Okay. I'm
Yeah,
thinking
50.
Mexican American, not Crimean. Yeah, Crimean anyway. So anyway, I would just like to look at the pictures of,
Well, I can go back and show it to you.
yeah.
What time is he? Let's see. Share screen and go back. See, there's Florence, probably in the 40s, don't you? That plaid dress. I don't know.
Well,
That's not her. That's actually her rather than the image.
Wow.
but they're going to be looking at a popular image in a newspaper or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Or
they're
a poster.
or a poster, or
You know,
something like that.
A print. I like the way
So-
Florence's lace cap has kind of translated into a babushka over there on the left.
Well, anyway, can we see the
Let's go back
applique
to
now?
there's the chocolatier,
Right.
and there she is, and that's very much the same silhouette.
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
as the chocolatier, it's for
That's-
the 50s. Where is she? Back.
See, so this, you know, I don't have great photos, you know, of the details. So you can, let me see. That's the best I probably have. Down there in the lower right.
Well,
Also, you know, there's birds in there. Are those nightingales?
I think it makes much more interpretive sense that it is Florence Nightingale, but the dress silhouette is not what we're seeing in.
She's
Well,
thinking. She's thinking.
And in addition to that, so it looks to me, but it's funny. I'm trying to figure out if it's my brain that's seeing the tray with the cups on it, right, from the chocolatier, because I've seen it like that for so long.
Uh-huh. It definitely follows that chocolatier silhouette.
Goodness.
Now, I don't know enough about bakers to know when they began using that. And this quilt was made by a veteran in the 70s. Maybe maybe the 60s, 10 years after the war. But
Barbara, do we actually know it was made by a veteran?
that's what Florence said. But then she also said George Washington.
Exactly. I mean, so many of those quilts that used to be attributed to the soldiers recuperating, we now know or very strongly suspect that they were not made by those guys. There couldn't be that many good sewers, right?
Oh, well, see, I haven't read that catalog.
Oh, well, in talking with Jane Lurie about it, she suggested that they were made by tailors for the soldier or of the soldiers' uniforms. But how could there be so many master quilt makers
That's a
among
good
those
point.
veterans? It just seems impossible. And whether this guy in the photograph made that quilt, we don't know. In the
You know,
picture,
they're
obviously-
always done, aren't they?
yeah.
Always finished.
And perhaps they were made for the soldiers, but they're so masterful. It's just seems it's not logical that there could have been that many good male sewers who happened to be recuperating.
Yes.
Um,
Well,
I think
I don't know.
the current thinking is that they were made by professional quilt makers out of uniforms.
out of the
I would think the same thing, and I must say I've never seen an American quilt with those rows of soldiers in the separate border.
no, it's that use of the borders.
Is
The
Very
Paul
British.
family quilt, that wool quilt that I talked about in the MFA exhibition, that has rows of soldiers on horseback.
Mm.
from the 1830s in the border.
Well, yeah. we
It's a
have talked
different sort of
about,
quilt,
Yeah.
but
And it looks like a master quilter made it. It just does not look like a soldier, no matter how well he did in his studies of patchwork making and
Right.
in his recuperation. It just doesn't.
Well, and how could there be so many? I mean, it's not like there's one quilt or two that a man might have made in his lifetime. There's dozens of these that have been recovered so far. Oh, that's telling me,
timer.
that's telling me it's time to move on.
All right.
that-
Well, thanks for listening, and you're opening my eyes. But whoever made it, they were British.
Yeah. Barbara, let me ask one more question.
Okay.
Did I understand you to say that you think that figure represents Florence Nightingale, but that they used the chocolatier
Mm-hmm.
image,
It's an image.
but you think that it represents Florence?
Florence.
Okay. That's,
But you know, it's a guess.
yeah. Well, great, thank you. Katie, you're almost on here. Let me introduce you. As I mentioned, she's the curator of the pre-1945 American Fine, Decorative, and Folk Arts at the Shelburne Museum. Just a little narrow little fields of interest and expertise.
Just a little bit. You know, the beauty of the job that I get to do is that I get to learn something new every day. And I also, every single day, get to be cut down by learning how much I don't know. So I was especially thrilled to be able to talk with you all about some of our objects, partly because, you know, the stories that they come with, that are supplied with them, we do our best to sort of keep those in the record and consider them with like a whole salt shaker, right? Rather than just a few grains, because you never sort of know what you're going to sort through. But when I was talking with Julie about, you know, what should I choose? What quilt should I choose? I have so many that I really love, and so many that I have sort of visited over and over again, that I wanted to bring one out that I really don't know much about. It's a fairly recent acquisition. And so what I thought I would do is tell you all, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, we got this. I'm going to share this. So I wanted to talk with you all. I've been really excited to get this conversation. I've been working on all kinds of things as we're opening our campus for the spring, and our textiles are such a beloved part of the collection. We also, this year, we're reopening our Hat and Fragrance textile buildings after some renovations. So we've got new quilts out, or new old quilts, and a lot of space for me to start thinking about how we want to start bringing out some objects that we haven't had out in a while. And this quilt came to us actually in 2000, right before the pandemic hit. And take a look at it. It's got 49 blocks. It's a sort of Baltimore album style quilt. It came to us through a donor whose mother found it in a white bag in her closet. That was the whole story. And she was living in Rhode Island, and he was curious to know if we might be interested in it. And I was really intrigued by what I saw in the blocks. Now, for those of you who know me, you know I love inscribed quilts. I love album quilts, and I love the fact that we can get at so many sort of pieces of history that are difficult to get to in other ways through them, whether it's genealogy or, you know, trade networks or community sort of friendships. And this one, after some sort of preliminary looking, we've determined that it was probably created by members of the Mount Sinai Congregational Church at Long Island. And so I thought I'd show you here. Let's see where that's located, because that's important, right? So this little dot that you see up here is where Mount Sinai is on Long Island. So it's right on Long Island Sound. It's sort of across the sound from New Haven. If you head up north from here, you'll get to Massachusetts and Boston and Providence. If you head south, of course, you'll hit Philadelphia and then Baltimore, way down south. And so when I started looking at this quilt and I didn't know anything about it, I thought, okay, you know, where could it be from? Once we figured out that it was probably from Long Island, we did a little bit of research into you know, what some of these biblical inscriptions and things like that on the quilt might reveal, and did a little bit of research. So this is a mid-19th century photograph of the Congregational Church in Mount Sinai, church where we think this quilt was created for some reason. And one of the sort of interesting things about this building is that it was the original sort of meeting house was built in 1807. But in the 1840s, they decided that they needed a bigger place. And they decided that in 1851, they would add the steeple that you see here, the narthex, and the front porch. So you've got a little front porch that's just started here. But that means, you know, so in 1807, the church initially gets built. And then about 50 years later, they decide that they need to upgrade. And so it's at about that time. So this we think is circa 1849 from one of the inscriptions. And I'm sorry, I don't have a picture of that on me, but you'll have to trust me for it. The ink that is on the quilt, some of it is faded so much that you cannot read it, but the majority of the inscriptions have to do with either, you know, Psalms or Proverbs that you might expect to see. There are also names of people that sort of link up with the community, that kind of thing. And then some really interesting blocks that I haven't seen in other places. So I thought I'd show you some of those. Let's see if I can get technology to work. Oh, and I also wanted to talk a little bit about what this quilt lives with, because there are other quilts in our collection that are Baltimore album style quilts. But most of the ones that we have in the 1840s or early 1950s are actually from Baltimore. So this was one of the quilts that came to us in 1952 through Florence Pito. We knew she'd come up again. She sort of turns up in all of the corners. I would have really liked to have a cocktail with her. Right? She seems like she would be a terrific person to hang out with. Lots of great stories. And she was super self-aware about how her ability to tell stories could rub some people the wrong way, right? She just went with it, which was terrific. So this quilt came to us through the Hundloser family, through Florence Pito. And you'll notice here, you know, it's like a typical Baltimore album style quilt, right? You've got these lovely blocks. Everything is sort of out there and fancy and upfront. We've got this one that we think was done in 1847 by Margaret Head, Elizabeth Miller, and others from Baltimore. Again, these really incredible baskets. And I know there's been a whole body of work that's been done on the patterns and baskets, and we can talk a little bit about that if you all want, because one of my questions about our quilt sort of centers on the transference of these images. So we've got this one, and then we also have the Major Ringgold album quilt, which we think was done in the late 1840s to commemorate Major Ringgold's victories in Baltimore, and it, you know, incorporates some of these really lovely blocks. I love the eagles with these sort of ombre, you know, blue materials. So we have this one, and what I wanted to do here, we can go back to this if you all would like, but I have some comparisons of like the Major Ringgold eagle with the eagle that we have on this little quilt from Long Island. Some of the like lyres and various musical instruments that are on the Major Ringgold quilt, and what we have in on the quilt from Long Island. So I had those. I also wanted to show you all some of the details of the quilt to kind of give you a sense both of how the sashing plays with things and how inscriptions work and all that kind of stuff. I know that these are not in focus, but you get the sense when you sort of look at this quilt that it's got nice tight hand quilting and applique. A lot of these inscriptions have faded, so you know you can see the ink where this has probably been washed at some point. There was also this, which I'm not very religious at all, and so I didn't know what the Carmina Sacra was, but I learned that in 1841, there was this sort of publication of this thing called the Carmina Sacra, and it was essentially the Boston collection of church music comprising the most popular psalm and hymn tunes in general use. So this was first published in 1841. They went through a variety of different editions of this, of the Carmina Sacra, and the Congregationalists out on Long Island were into it, clearly, because they added it to their quilt. And so what I kind of enjoyed about that was, you know, we see this this coming together of these sort of communities using icons that are resulting from like the proliferation of affordable print culture in our worlds, right? And that also sort of plays into the whole patterning with Baltimore album quilts and those kinds of things we could talk about, but I will keep going. So we've got this sort of Carmina Sacra block. Oh, I found this, which was pretty cool. This was how it was sort of originally advertised. We also have other blocks on this quilt that I love. I was talking with Julie about a quilt she was thinking about talking about tonight. It has a lovely tool block in it, and this quilt that I chose to pull out tonight also does. So we've got some elements that are here for, like, I think this was probably for like mortaring bricks and that kind of thing. You've got a little hammer, you've got a compass. Let's see what else. We've got some blocks. There are 2 blocks actually that involve plows. And so that idea of sort of work and constant labor and the fruits of your labors, right? There's this one too, which I think is really lovely. I actually, the material that the maker used on this block for this sort of top row of soil with the flowers and then the shady, dark, striated soil below it is really, the fabric, it's funny, it reminds me a little bit of Yayoi Kusama. So maybe some like contemporary viewers will see that too. But yeah, I really, it's clear that the blocks were made by many hands because, as we were talking about earlier, with the Civil War / perhaps Crimean War quilt, you know, the aptitude and sort of ability between hands on different blocks is obvious. So my thought so far has been, well, I think probably these were assembled by at least a handful of members and then put together by one central person. Let's see, what else do I have? Oh, there are also really interesting blocks like this. So while it's difficult to see on this screen, it says US California on here. And so if you think about the 1840s and what's happening in terms of, you know, westward expansion and all these kinds of things, if you think back to that map that I pulled up earlier, with its location on the sort of northern shore of Long Island, it's a lovely protected harbor. It's very close to major seafaring ports. You know, sometimes people forget that in the mid-19th century, Baltimore was like the 3rd largest city in North America, right? It was hugely important. And so to sort of think about those links, not just on land, but on water, that people living in that community could have taken advantage of, I think is an important thing to think about when assessing an object like this. So we've got boats. What else do we have in here? We've got these lovely baskets with, you know, stuffed work fruit and so on. I really love it when a maker makes an effort to use the textures and patterns in a piece of material to their best advantage. And so those strawberries are really lovely and the basket is so great. Even the leaves have this nice kind of, you can almost get a kind of leafy texture from them. So this is another basket. This one has probably faded out, so you can kind of make out the outline of this applique basket with 2 little handles right here. I love in this particular block the like stamens and the flowers that sort of reach out. Just really a really lovely way to put all of that together. We have instruments, right? Because if you're making a joyful noise, some of these elements have probably faded too. We have this lovely eagle with this, you know, great. So unfortunately, whatever was written in here is gone now. But this sort of lovely swag that he holds in his beak. And then another lyre. And with that, what I thought I would do is basically open it up for conversation about some questions that I have. So earlier in the presentation, I took a look and shared some of the Baltimore album quilts that we have in our collection, ones that we know are tied to people who were living in Baltimore. But this is a New York quilt. And I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about, you know, why they look the way that they do. I'm curious about questions that you all have about this particular object, whether I can answer them or not. But this seemed like I get so many calls from people who say, I found this thing in my house and I don't know what to do with it and I don't know what it is. I thought it would be a delightful exercise to go through and talk with you all about this. So I'll see if I can go back. There we go. Okay, so here's the quilt at large. Yeah, so what marks a New York quilt like this versus a Baltimore album quilt? And how is it that these patterns are sort of migrating up the coast?
Barbara?
Merikay wants to talk to me because I'm from Long Island, not far from where this quilt was made. And so I have taken an interest in New York albums, and they are as distinctive as Baltimore's, but we don't have a Debby Cooney to be documenting them. It's just me. And so many of the quilts that were bought in the 70s and 80s were bought by New York dealers, New York collectors. But at that time, people didn't care where they came from. They just wanted to throw them up there. But I found, let's look at your quilt, and I found 3 things on there that I think are very New York. One is tools, the mason's tools, with the trowel, yep. And then the plows. But I always say if it's got a horse on it, it's a New York album. Now, Debby can argue, and so can Rhonda, that there are horses in Baltimore, but not like they have them.
Not many.
They just loved putting farm animals. And you just get the feeling that these people are farmers rather than city people, that they're proud of their horses, they're proud of their cows, they're proud of their plows. And so that's one of the other things. I was looking for a cat. Unfortunately, I don't see a cat. That's another great clue. This quilt reminds me very much of one that's in the Denver Art Museum from Long Island. And, I can't pull it up right now, but I'll put it on our 6 know-it-all, show us your quilts page, because it has a sailboat on it. And it's just similar in many ways. So there's a New York style too. And did it come independently of Baltimore? There's a Philadelphia style. There's a Southern Pennsylvania, Southeastern Pennsylvania style that's outside of Philadelphia. There's a New Jersey style, which overlaps with Philadelphia and New York. So, and there's a Maine style. So, how these things all developed at the same time. And we have to remember that it was pretty easy to get from Baltimore to Philadelphia or Baltimore to Long Island, because they had these ships, sailboats that hugged the shore, and it was transportation. You didn't have to take the road, you took the boat. So I'm sure families, and don't forget also, one of the things I've been talking about for a long time is that some of these blocks were made by professional block makers. It's just like when we go back to the wool quilts. How do you get everybody up to speed in 5 years? And some of these are very skillful, as you said, like the tulips, some of them are not. But did people make these and sell them? And could you buy them by mail? So it's definitely a New York album. Another thing that I'm surprised, though, that the sashing's pink and it's a pink print. One of the greatest signs of a New York album is the idea of putting the blocks on the square rather than diagonal, and then sashing them with red. They love sashing them with turkey red, but here we have pale pink. So we'll throw some stuff up on our Show Us Your Quilts page and look at these some more. I mean, I love looking at it. It's a great quilt.
Yeah, we need to look at some more album quilts from the Northeast, because I looked at that and I thought, Maine.
See?
Yeah.
Really?
I thought more New York for me.
That, I mean, it's not exactly like, but there are similarities to the quilts in the new Maine book, the album quilts, and I'm fascinated by the ships that show up for, 100 years earlier. They're quilting ships in those petticoats from Newport and the Long Island Sound of Connecticut.
Yeah.
I think that's just such an important factor about a local culture. And the other thing, there's a couple of other things. I love the bricks around the border with the mason's trowel.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
I never noticed that.
I think those are so cool. And also farm animals show up a lot on the Connecticut album quilts.
You know, I just wanted to mention that I was working on a quilt from the Shelburne, which I won't be talking about today. I'll be talking about the next time. But I wanted to say that there are, what you'll learn about is 9 related quilts made in Delaware County and Chester County, Pennsylvania. And that's what I'm going to be talking about. I just want to mention that every one of those quilts that are very similar has tools, a different kind of block of tools, but 9 Chester County, Delaware County, it's kind of presentation quilts have tools on them. So they do show up otherwise.
Yeah, same thing in Connecticut. I don't know if you remember that the Spiritualist Society quilt that I talked about last October had horses, cows, I think it had a pig on it or something like that. I'll have to go back and look, maybe not quite the pig, but anyway, it also had a bunch of tools on it. And it was very much like another Connecticut album quilt that had a lot of the same blocks and stuff. So,
well, we can,
but
Do we have time for me
those are
to talk
around
about Baltimore?
those are around the Long Island Sound too, Connecticut down on the coast. So
you know, we're going a little long here, but it does sound like Debbie has something that she should be contributing.
Yes, I would not call this Baltimore style, except in some of the blocks. It's certainly not the construction of a Baltimore album with those small blocks. There's only 1 or 2 that I can think of like that. I would have called it a New York state quilt just by the looks, you know, just by the overall look of it with the tools and the animals. The ship isn't quite what Baltimore would have used. They used Baltimore clippers, and they don't look quite like that.
The sound is easier to get across than the ocean.
I would say that block C4 is the most Baltimore-like, that wreath with the harp in it. I can think of one that's very similar to that. There are a couple others that show up in Baltimore. The eagle actually shows up quite often in Pennsylvania, and I can send you some pictures of ones that I've collected. The sashing is just not the same as Baltimore, and certainly not with the corner blocks. There are pineapples on Baltimore quilts, but your Hunloser quilt is very different from a lot of the others because it's associated with Jewish families. There's a whole article, paper written about that. And they're very bold. And this one is very
Delicate.
Yes, it is. It's delicate. It's quite a bit more delicate than most of the Baltimore album quilts that I've seen. They don't have plows and horses. But I can see why someone would think it was Baltimore style, because that's the most well-known quilt of this type, album type right now. And so it's associated with that before almost anything else. But yeah, I would think Barbara's right, and Lynn, that it's more northerly in style.
So I have one question before you move on. If you look at D5, the fruit basket, and this is a sort of general, whether it's made in Baltimore or elsewhere. I know that there's a bevy of good literature on the making of patterns and like the selling of block kits and those kinds of things. So like D5 for me, when I look at that, I see the way that the strawberries have used the material, the basket. Like, was that a kit block, or was that just a really creative person who was making up their own basket of fruit?
Or selling.
Or selling.
It's not
What we
common
need to do is find similar strawberry blocks.
Yeah, it's not common on Baltimore albums, not blocks like that. It's
You
very
know,
cleverly done.
there's a lot of strawberries on New York quilts too. And the rural people grew strawberries by the millions for the city. And so in studying these New York quilts, I even talked about strawberry festivals that were Civil War fundraisers. Strawberries were an important crop in rural New York.
We definitely have to move on, as fascinating as this is. And I just wanted to say that the wonderful thing is that people are studying these the way that we are, and the way that, that they're now being compared, that there are enough examples and enough good scholarship that, Barbara, even though you're the only one you think doing it in New York.
Oh, I'm not the only one.
But more and more people are doing such things and putting them next to each other and really trying to figure out what's what. And we're lucky to have people on this very panel who do that kind of work in detail. So let's move on to, in fact, that very person, Debby Cooney, who's a quilt historian and collector with a special interest in quilts made within a 200-mile radius of Washington, D.C., Maryland, Southern Pennsylvania, and Northern Virginia. Debbie's the co-author with Rhonda McGowan of the 2017 Uncoverings paper, Baltimore Album Quilts New Research. And here you go, Debby.
Okay. The Shelburne Museum has a wonderful applique quilt top with embroidered name and date of Mary Jane Carr, 1854. It was made in Columbia, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, according to museum records. The only likely candidate in the 1850 federal census was born in Ireland in 1790. Laid out in the older center diamond format, the top abounds with flowers, grapes, vines, birds, animals, insects, all enclosed in a wonderful scallop border. An almost identical quilt found in Lancaster County, but with no other information, belongs to antique dealers Mary and Joe Koval. Quilt scholars have noted that the Carr top and the Koval quilt have much in common, and with a group of quilts made by Mary Brown of East Nottingham in Cecil County, Maryland, which I discussed in the April Know-It-All program. All of these bed covers show influences of Baltimore album quilts, especially their brightly colored fabrics and the construction of their flowers and vines. As recorded by his family, Israel Reynolds commissioned local master seamstress Mary B. Brown, also one of his relatives, to make this fabulous album quilt when she was 75 years old. Photographs do not do justice to the quality of the work, much of which is done in the difficult reverse applique technique. The center diamond here is surrounded by successively wider borders, with the outer one replicating the look of exotic chintzes, which remained popular in Maryland into the 1850s. A quilt with more than a dozen blocks identical to those of the Reynolds album appeared in the quilt engagement calendar with no information. These blocks include feather wreaths, sunflowers, pineapple, birds, and squirrel. The parrot, potted bouquets, exotic four-lobed plants, and many calico prints are shared with the Carr and Koval bed covers. Gloria Allen, the first scholar to examine these quilts and top in depth, wrote that Mary Brown may have designed a number of quilts and sold basted and completed squares. It is possible that she worked in much the same way as Mary Simon, who designed and basted elaborate squares found on a number of Baltimore album quilts. Both Simon and Mary Brown seem to have produced entire quilt tops to be finished by the buyers. I believe that the Carr and Koval quilts are just such products. These center diamonds have similar mounds of earth, graceful draping of leaves and flowers, as well as thin stems rising from containers. Many of the Israel Reynolds stems are done in reverse applique, while the Carr stems are simply sewn down. 3 roses clustered in slight curves grace both the Carr quilt and the quilt engagement calendar pieces. Notice the owl and the paired birds for later on. A recently rediscovered quilt, the Carr and Koval parrots are nearly identical and made with the same fabrics and with the same perch and same embroidery around them. a recently rediscovered quilt made by sisters Martha Mendenhall and Hannah Mendenhall Trimble of Mary Brown's Upper Nottingham community includes an almost identical parrot using the same green as the Reynolds quilt. The Mendenhall and Reynolds quilt have many identical motifs, but Mendenhall's is even more elaborate in its decorative devices and reverse applique. And I wish I had an overall picture to show you, but I don't. Mendenhall descendants own paper patterns of animals and birds that match several of those found on Mary Jane Carr, the Koval, Israel Reynolds, and Quilt Engagement calendar quilts. This exciting discovery knits all these bed covers together stylistically. Two squirrels of the Carr and Koval quilts appear to be cut from this pattern. Two squirrels of the Carr and Kovals appear to be from the same ones. And this map shows the relationship between Carr and Koval locations and the largely Quaker settled areas of Mary Brown, Israel Reynolds, and the Mendenhall sisters, plus two related quilts that I'm going to show in a bit. Rising Sun is the official name of the town in Cecil County, down in here, Maryland, where most of these quilts were produced. But their makers and inscribers termed it East Nottingham after the Quaker meeting with jurisdiction over the territory that stretched into Chester County, Pennsylvania, before the Mason-Dixon line was finalized in 1767. The shaded areas show the Pennsylvania townships of East Nottingham, New London, New Garden, and northeastern Delaware, where friends of the quilt makers lived. Lancaster County is just west of Chester, which takes up all of this. Lancaster is right up here, with Lancaster City being 32 miles from East Nottingham on modern roads. Columbia is about 45 miles north. Lancaster County had many Quaker settlements, but not in the concentrations of Chester and Cecil counties. Baltimore is 65 miles just to the south of Columbia, and of course, Philadelphia is just off up here. Martha Pearson signed an album with blocks both identical and similar to Mary Brown's. Martha signed a block also, along with family and friends, on an album with blocks in a much simpler style. The owl and the vase blocks were inscribed by Martha Mendenhall right here. And these are the only two really fancy blocks on this quilt. With the appearance of the Mendenhall patterns, researchers studying these quilts are having to reassess the roles of these women who were related by blood and marriage in designing and or producing them. The Carr and Koval bed covers are outliers to some extent, as no family connections have yet been found. And here are two blocks from these two quilts that I just showed. They are seen on other Mary Brown associated quilts, and they are echoed in the Carr and Koval quilts. The Baltimore connection is another aspect of all these quilts being studied. Jennifer Goldsboro, the acknowledged expert on Baltimore album quilts, was intrigued by the similarities among the Reynolds Mendenhall bed covers shown earlier in the work of Mary Simon. The paisley leaf rose was one of Simon's signature motifs. Right in here. She sometimes placed contrasting colors and different fabrics to emphasize the paisley shapes and outlines of roses, right in here. And used tulips with different fabrics, outlined in different fabrics. And here's one over here and there's one down here. The earlier style of Baltimore album quilts used a lot of dark blue solids for eagles, vases, and eperons, which appear in similar motifs on Mary Jane Carr and the Koval's quilts. So there's a lot more to study on the connections among these outstanding examples of the quilt maker's art.
Wow.
So what do you think?
Wow.
It's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing.
They're so beautiful.
I mean, they're fabulous. The thing is, they're all fabulous quilts. They're just overwhelming, except for, you know, the one that's very simple. And there have to be more out there. I'm just convinced that there are more, and we will discover them.
Can you talk again? It's hard to keep up with everything in these short presentations. Talk again
Sure.
about the family connections that you mentioned.
Okay, there are 2 Mendenhall quilts. And one of them is the one that's just been rediscovered, has the patterns.
Right.
Pearson quilt is another relative of theirs. So there are Pearson and Mendenhalls, and they are all related to Mary Brown and Israel Reynolds. They all lived in East Nottingham, which is, in Upper Cecil County. So they all were sharing influences and patterns. Maybe I'm sort of thinking that the patterns were shared because
How closely were they related?
The genealogists are having to sort that out. Rhonda McAllen and Kathy Erickson are really working and Laurie Stubbs especially has been studying this for years. There are so many interconnections that it's hard to sort them out.
I just find that really interesting because I'm continuing to work on these bed rugs from New London County, and the family connections are what's really important.
Yeah.
In these, and so to hear this parallel is very interesting to me.
And the fact that the 2, the Mary Jane Carr and the Colwell's quilts come from just a little further away, that they would be found in Lancaster County, which doesn't have as many Quakers. Why one hasn't turned up somewhere else in Maryland, I'm not sure, but they may be there.
Yeah.
Well, considering the rate at which they're being discovered these days,
Yes.
we can be very, and we can anticipate lots of more coming out.
We can be hopeful. Yes.
Yeah. Great. Wonderful.
It's wonderful. And the blocks, the blocks are so beautiful.
Yeah, there's so much biodiversity in there, all the different kinds. I mean, the time that it would take to think, okay, I want this sort of green parrot, maybe it's a Carolina parakeet, I don't know, versus the owl. Like you were talking a little bit about this sort of Quaker connections, but how there aren't as many Quakers in Lancaster County. It's right next to Chester County though. And Chester County is packed to the gills, right?
Yeah.
With people who are really, really into, learning. And there's so much exchange going on at that time that yeah, I have to tell you, this is not a quilt that has ever really appealed to me until just now. And I'm so glad.
Well, I want to say that the day we're recording this is National Parrot Day.
Oh.
You know how you get stuff in your email that you really didn't need to know. So it's appropriate.
Well, and we think there may be overlap between Mary Brown's designs and sort of paper cutout patterns and those Chester County quilts. There just may be a connection there too. We don't know how widely she spread her influence, but she was 75 when she made that Israel Reynolds quilt. So she had to have been doing something before that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this is such an interesting way to get at community ties and family ties and economic ties and labor, and just it's a very valuable way to think about micro histories.
Yeah, and we're so lucky that there are so many, because so many of them were heirloom quilts, right?
Yeah.
So we get to all these years later start, gathering them and comparing them and doing the genealogy. It's so exciting. It's just wonderful.
Fortunately, they were so fabulous that they survived.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes you think about those that didn't. Yeah. Yeah. Well, wonderful. Okay, let's move on. I think we're going on with Lynn now. Lynn Bassett is an independent scholar specializing in historic costume and textiles, particularly of New England. Her most recent exhibition, I hope I'm right, is New London Quilts and Coverlets, 1750 to 1825 at the Florence Griswold Museum in Old Lyme, Connecticut. But I know that she's working on something coming up, which you may want.
Well, actually, the New London one is closed now, but you can see it online on the Florence Griswold's website. And I have a new exhibition open. It's not a quilt or bed cover exhibition. It's called Making It Last: Sustainability in Victorian Fashion. And it's at the Lockwood Matthews Mansion Museum in Norwalk, Connecticut, open through the first week in November. So you have no excuse. Go and see it. So my choice for this presentation is this post-Civil War crazy quilt, because I love quilts that tell stories. And I think there's about at least 100 stories in this quilt. And my first mistake is that this is actually number 16. So hopefully the rest of this will be better. My interest in this quilt is how closely it relates to scrapbooks, which became a really important, a big thing in American life during the Civil War period, because this is the period when not only is newspaper paper much less expensive and thus much more available, but we've got the telegraph, which is producing news very fast for the first time, and people are reading newspapers just like never before. They've always been a little crazy about newspapers in America, but they got really crazy about newspapers, and people started keeping scrapbooks of war news. And so this is the beginning, the real beginning of scrapbooking in American culture. And I really see crazy quilts as another aspect of scrapbooking. And I think this crazy quilt I'm going to talk about relates very closely to this idea that came up in the Civil War. And I would like to cite Ellen Gruber Garvey's book, Writing with Scissors, American Scrapbooks here. So the maker articulates her connection to the United States and imagines post-war nationhood while making this quilt, which was an act to preserve history. The Civil War was the defining experience of that American generation and of the country. Veterans and civilians alike struggled to reconcile themselves with their losses and to adapt to the challenges of a new industrial society. Bonds forged on the battlefield, in camp, and in hospital would remain even after the soldiers, sailors, doctors, and nurses had dispersed across an ever-expanding country. Across the country, monuments to the Civil War dead, Union and Confederate, were erected, listing the battles fought and the names of the fallen. The first Union Veterans Organization, the Military Order of the Loyal Legion of the United States, was created in 1865, primarily for commissioned officers of the Union Army or Navy. It was seen as too aristocratic, and so other Union veterans organizations were formed. And the largest, of course, was the Grand Army of the Republic, the GAR, which was established in 1866. With its guiding motto of fraternity, charity, loyalty, the GAR lobbied for federal pensions for Union veterans and established homes for disabled veterans and the orphans of deceased soldiers. Many quilts were made to help raise funds for these endeavors. But let's take a close look at this crazy quilt. The silk crazy quilts of the late 19th century are often like scrapbooks of souvenir ribbons. This example is remarkable both for the number of Civil War related ribbons and for the fact that both Union and Confederate souvenir ribbons are represented. Unfortunately, the maker of the quilt is unknown, but she was clearly expressing a desire to rebuild fellow feeling between countrymen and represent a happier life in post-Civil War United States of America. So millions of these souvenir ribbons were produced following the war. They could be inexpensive printed ones like this one, or the Stephen graph, which are woven, which is a technique that was That was developed in the mid-19th century in England by a fellow named Stephen. And I have a blow up of this one right here, so I hope you can see the texture and the very fine detail. So we see both of these types of ribbons. Paterson, New Jersey was a major producer of ribbons like this. Here we have a Stephen graph of General Grant, our next president, and then a stamped, a printed ribbon here of the R.E. Lee camp in Richmond, Virginia.
Wow.
So thinking about that one in particular with a little more context, Union veterans, as I mentioned, received federal pensions for the service during the war, and Union dead were moved to national cemeteries. But it was up to the people and the state legislatures of the former Confederacy to fund pensions for Confederate soldiers, establish Confederate cemeteries, and care for veterans unable to help themselves. Virginia Confederate veterans who had organized the Robert E. Lee camp, which is that ribbon I just showed you, decided in 1883 and 84 to establish and fund a soldiers' home in Richmond. And this is a crazy quilt that they raffled off as a fundraiser for that. And that veterans home operated from 1885 until its last resident died in 1941. And the Robert E. Lee camp functions today as the R.E. Lee Camp Sons of Confederate Veterans. And Republican clubs sprung up all over the country in this post-war period. The Republicans, of course, put out a statement saying that they were superior to Democrats in every way. I'm not going to list them, but just take it for granted that they were better than Democrats in every way. And President Lincoln, of course, was a Republican. And here we have the Richmond Light Infantry Blues. They were established as a company of voluntary militia nearly 100 years before this commemorative ribbon was printed. Named for their distinctive blue and white uniforms, the company served throughout the Civil War as Company A, 46th Regiment, Virginia Infantry. The unit served in American wars until it was deactivated in 1996. The Richmond Blues were as much a social organization as a military unit. In times of peace, the company participated in parades and general celebrations and in the reception of distinguished visitors to the city of Richmond, from General Lafayette in 1824 to American presidents in the 20th century. It was for one of these public celebrations that this historic Southern military unit visited the northern city of Newark, New Jersey in 1884, and for which this souvenir ribbon was collected. And this is another ribbon from the same event, but not in this quilt. It's held at the American Civil War Museum, and it shows this to have been a reunion between Union and Confederate veterans. The R.E. Lee camp again, and the Light Infantry Blues of Richmond, along with the Phil Kearny and Lincoln GAR posts of Newark. And that ribbon shows hands shaking over a second National Confederate flag and a United States flag. That's somewhere anyway, that's another one. And so here we have Grant again running for office, but this is the GAR post, which was established in 1866. And this magnificent ribbon worn by someone from the reception committee. You got to wonder if it was the person who made this quilt. The Pickett Buchanan Camp is a Confederate veterans organization in Norfolk, which was one of 80 Virginia Confederate veterans organizations that eventually joined to create one large group, the Grand Camp Confederate Veterans Department of Virginia. And that was organized in 1890. So interestingly, found on the back of this quilt is this little souvenir button for the Home for Confederate Women. The home was established in Richmond in 1898 for the needy wives and daughters of Confederate soldiers. At its height, the home served 70 residents. It closed in 1989, and the 1932 neoclassical style building that housed the Home for Confederate Women was acquired by the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. So you can see it today. And notice the Stephen graph here of Buffalo Bill Cody. He was a Union veteran too. He was a scout and hunter for the Army during the Indian Wars. And in 1883, he started his Wild Bill West show. So this quilt represents numerous and fascinating stories of hardship, forgiveness, reconciliation, friendship, unique American entertainment, and political aspirations. The ribbons collected together as one would clip and gather newspaper articles and pictures for a scrapbook provides a profound view of life in the post-Civil War United States. So I
How
just
did it come, how did it come to the Shelburne? Do you know, Katie? Do you know?
Sorry about that. So this one I think was a fairly recent purchase, wasn't it? This was, I think
it was a
Jeep
purchase.
purchased it. Yeah. So it's interesting. We've just updated some of our galleries, and we'll be able to, like, we have new slant boards that are up, and so we'll be able to put up some more crazy quilts than we have been able to in the past. And this is one that's really it's raised a lot of questions in my mind. And I've wondered, you know, when we're interpreting these kinds of things, one of the things that I run up against frequently is how to explain the difference in the time and the fact that our sort of Democratic and Republican parties are not the same. Also, I grew up in the South, and some of my early education was a product of like the UDC, the United Daughters of the Confederacy. So I think a lot about how, you know, those stories get carried through, and objects like these are really powerful transmitters of all of that.
I think of this quilt, you know, if I can be a little cynical, but I think of it as a quilt of wishful thinking.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of that.
I wanted to say one thing. I've been interested in these ribbon quilts, and I found that they didn't call those ribbons. They called them badges.
Oh, okay.
So when I was looking, you know, I wanted to see who made these and what they cost. And finally, I figured out if you look for badge, you know, Union Army, you'll find far more than if you look for ribbon.
Oh, interesting.
So I think of a badge as metal, says U.S., you know, Treasury Department or something on it, but they called them badges.
Huh.
Well, that makes sense because a lot of them were intended to be worn,
Mm-hmm.
you know, during these
When you have pictures
events and
and
such.
covered with them, you know,
Yeah.
veterans.
The
covered with them.
Stephen graphs were actually generally intended as bookmarks
Mm.
and cards. So it's interesting that they end up in the, not surprising, but they had kind of a different market, but
Yeah.
they end up in these quilts too.
Were they?
And they were more expensive because they were,
Yeah, much.
they were woven.
And I presume they were sturdier, less fragile.
Oh, yeah.
They probably were,
Yeah.
because that gold would flake off, or that
Right.
gold,
Yeah.
that gold paint would flake off.
Right.
The
Yeah.
scrapbook analogy is very interesting too. You know, think about saving things that you're going to assemble and putting in things that come a little later, but going back to a page and pasting it there. And that's kind of the idea you get when looking at these squares on this quilt.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a very close and important connection between the crazy quilts and scrapbooking, which becomes important just prior to the fashion for crazy quilts, especially these ones that have a lot of ribbons
Mm-hmm.
and symbols that are meaningful at the time that now we're like, why is that horse on there? And
Mhm.
Well, and even, I mean, we have some scrapbooks in our collection at Shelburne that, you know, they're the sort of room scrapbooks, right? Where you're provided with, this is for people who might not know what these look like. I know you do, Lynn, but they're provided with like a room, and then you fill it with all kinds of things. So you might fill it with a cutout of a person. or maybe, you know, like a drawing of someone's face who you know, you could sort of decoupage that on. But often, you know, furniture that was being advertised in how to furnish your house books, those kinds of things we'd cut out. There were stickers and pieces of fabric that you put into these things. And so it's going both ways, but it's certainly part of this much larger culture of writing with scissors. What a great title.
Yeah.
And, you know, today it's Pinterest and, you know, my digital files. But I never thought about crazy quilts as scrapbooks, and you're exactly right.
Yeah.
You know, one big difference would be that the scrapbook you can keep going back and adding to, whereas once you finish a quilt, you generally don't put more on it. So it has a different time frame, or, you know, sense of overallness and ongoingness. Scrapbooks feel like they're much more ongoing in a way. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Merikay. Merikay, hi. Merikay Waldvogel is an independent scholar, quilt historian, and author from Knoxville, Tennessee. Her quilt research spans a broad swath of quilt history, from 19th century Southern quilts and patterns through the 20th century quilts and quilt makers. Merikay.
All right. All right. Well, thank you, Julie. Thank you, everybody. I think this is a great idea when we visit a museum and look at what they've got. And the Shelburne, I thought, wow, there's a Bertha Meckstroth quilt there. Some of you know her, some of you may not know her, but I would suggest that she might be the most iconoclastic made quilt maker in history. And maybe we could call her weird or an original, but you've got one of her quilts and it's pretty interesting. And how it got there, things like that. So this is the quilt, and this is Bertha herself, Bertha Amelia Meckstroth, born in 1875, died in 1960. The quilt, well, it's not that exciting. I found it in your book, Enduring Grace, about page 12. And on it gives a little bit of a caption. Now, I was interested in her because of something that Joyce Gross wrote about. We mentioned Joyce Gross earlier. And she wrote this article based on her research into Bertha Meckstroth. And I'm just going to quickly kind of read what it says here on the writer, go kind of the highlights. Her name, Bertha Amelia Meckstroth, she was born in Minnesota. Let's remember that. Her mother died early. She was raised by her father, who was a doctor. She was split from her sister Anna was sent to Chicago when her mother died. And her Anna met a man who was and married the founder of Sears, Roebuck and Company. So her name was Anna Sears. Bertha stayed in Minnesota for quite a while. She says she learned quilt making from the housemaker. But later she went to high school. She was sent to high school in Claremont, New Hampshire. Remember that. She entered Radcliffe College in 1902 at the age of 27. One of her college classmates was, Helen Keller. And Helen talked about the fact that Bertha was the only one who really befriended her and learned sign language from her. But Bertha was studying art. She studied sculpture. She apparently had been kind of, she knew Mrs. Potter Palmer, and she, an art collector in Chicago. And when she got to college, she decided to study sculpture. She graduated in 1906 from Radcliffe, very proud of it. There's kind of a in-between phase there where she does different things, but eventually she went to live with her now widowed sister, Anna Sears, in a Spanish-style villa in Glencoe, Illinois, up north of the city of Chicago on Lake Michigan. And remember, it was a really beautiful home, and it was named Casa Tranquilla. At this point, the founder of Sears Roebuck wasn't in the house. But Bertha went on. She made quilts beginning in 1916 for family members, but she says that she didn't really like the traditional designs, kind of like Drunkard's Path, like I have behind me. Now, she didn't make that one, but it was probably made, she made one of those. You'll see one in a minute. Instead, she decided to make her quilts sculptural. She liked the surface, to play with the surface of a quilt. And she played with applique, reverse applique, and even trapunto work. She made a lot of themed quilts with a religious theme, poetry, family, moralistic kinds of things. In 1933, she had about 140 quilts that she had made, and she was quite well known in Chicago. She was invited to give a quilt lecture at the Illinois State Building, the Host Building, at the Century of Progress Exposition, the Chicago World's Fair. Now, at this point, you probably know I spent a lot of time researching Chicago World's Fair, and 1930s quilts. So this woman intrigued me, and I wanted to learn more about her. But supposedly after that, she spent many years giving quilt lectures in Chicago. She bragged about the fact that that her quilts were shown at the Chicago World's Fair. So a lot of people think that her quilts were entered in the contest that Sears organized, but she wasn't. We don't know if she entered one. She was invited a second time to repeat that lecture in the fall. She made, in the end, at the end of her life, she had made about 160 quilts, which she hoped would be in a museum, maybe in Minnesota, maybe in Chicago, but instead she ended up in a mental institution, kind of a ward of this, not the state, of course, she did have some money, but a bank was handling her estate. She filled out a will, supposedly, passed away, and it's not clear. There was years of contentious arguments about these quilts, because I think Radcliffe wanted them, but in the end, it was divided. Another college, Barrett College of the Sacred Heart in Lake Forest, Illinois, right near her, made some claim on these quilts, and the judge ruled that half of them would go to that college, half would go to Radcliffe, 5,000 went to Radcliffe, 5,000 went to the Illinois College. So where are those quilts today? To finish the story, the sad part is they apparently didn't particularly appreciate them, and they auctioned all of them off. So there were some that were with family, and some of them went to different auction houses, and they just appear in various places. This is where I got interested in it. At the the International Quilt Studies Center, back in the early 2000s, I was invited to come and look at their quilts, and I was actually doing a kit research. I found this quilt, and I thought, wow, this is very unusual. And I looked on the back of the quilt, there was a little name tag on it, said Casa Tranquilla. I'd already read about Bertha Meckstroth in Joyce Gross's book, or her article that was in there. Joyce, you really might want to look up that article, because it's really this in the Quilt Journal, fall 1981. She interviewed a woman who knew Bertha, and it's a much different story that I'm telling, very lively. But this woman, Bertha, really could make a novel. I've always thought that. I think a lot of people could. But anyway, here was this quilt, and it was from the Jonathan Holstein collection. He had given these quilts in a group to IQSC, and on the back was this little tag that said Casa Tranquilla. Well, that was where Bertha Meckstroth lived. And this quilt sure looks like what she was talking about. Then I decided, well, I'm going to do some research on what I did back then. The internet wasn't quite so good, but I ended up finding her papers in, of all places, Special Collections, Louisiana State University Library. And it's a fascinating group of materials. I'm showing you on the left, it's a 4-page list, typed list of all the quilts in order that she made them. And some of them were duplicate. You could see that second one up there. She made 2 that were pushed in a corner. And then there was this little catalog called The Singing Needle. It's only a 4 or 5 page catalog, but that was her lecture. That's what she handed out at that Century of Progress lecture. The Louisiana State University has black and white pictures. She must have used them for publicity purposes. There's also an autobiography unpublished of hers. It's really a fabulous group. So I learned about your quilt at the Shelburne from these two pieces. I also learned that this quilt is called, according to that list, Deer in Wedgwood. Wasn't called Reindeer. And it was made 1931-32. And interestingly, she made 3 of these. They were, this one is cotton and it's 68 by 68 inches. I know that from an IQS quilt record. This is typical. This is a kind of thing that I found at the Louisiana State University Library. And I was today, because of the internet, I could type in the words that are on that quilt, and it turns out it's a poem by James Russell Lowell. Now, in her list, she meant, or in her little lecture for that 1933, no, in the list, there's a name of a quilt she lists. She calls it The Little Bird Sits. And that's the name of, and you could see it at the top, The Little Bird Sits. And then it goes on and has the story. The little bird sits at the door in the sun, da, da, da. Bertha's name was Birdie. Her friends, everybody, even when she became an older woman, named her, she liked to be called Birdie. Here are some other pictures from the Louisiana State University Library collection. Some are in black and white, some are in color. Now, so to go back to your quilt, I can now say that it's called Psalm 91. And it was made in 1931, 30 through 31. It's cotton. We know that from the Shelburne collection. But one thing that's interesting on your caption, it says the quilt was given by Bertha Meckstroth to her friend, Carrie Hopper Putnam of Claremont, New Hampshire. Now remember, from the autobiography, I learned that Bertha Meckstroth was sent to New Hampshire for some reason to go to high school. And then we look at, I think you might not like this quilt so much because it is a whole cloth quilt, and it's the kind of quilt that you need to look up at closely. But truthfully, this is a really good example of the kinds of Meckstroth kind of signature design traits, the chiseled, sculpted lettering, the fine quilting, and then again, this religious theme. It's named Psalm 91. From that list, I learned that there were 2 copies of this made in 1930 to 31. And from the singing, from that little catalog, it said that one was included in the 1933 lecture. So that may be some new information about that. And then I wanted to just go on and show you some of the new quilts, the new acquisitions. Well, 2018 is not that new, but at the International Quilt Museum, they were approached by a collector named, well, Elizabeth. It's called the Elizabeth Morrow Collection. I've not made the connection of her to Bertha, but she owned about 14 quilts that recently went to, now it's called the International Quilt Museum. And so what I've done for this presentation was look for those quilts for a description in those lists that I found at LSU. The one on the left is inscribed according to IQM 1923. So that's a very early piece that she did. And then the Drunkard's Path does represent the kind of traditional designs that didn't really thrill Bertha. And the one on the right, they have untitled. They really don't have names for these at IQM, but I found this one on the list, and it's called The Sky, or the Spacious Filament. Yeah, and it was, the dates are there too. Here's some more. The one on the left was recently donated to IQM from Patricia Cox in Minneapolis. And it's either called The Three Wise Men or whatever. I think, well, I have a feeling this quilt did come from the auction from the Barrett College quilts. The next one, it is one of the recent ones. And then, but interestingly, look at the one on the right. I just think it's really cool. They have a color picture at LSU Library of this quilt. So again, she made two in this very same design. And I want to point out, it's called Mary of Nazareth. All of this, you could look on the International Quilt Museum on this, you could get really close up of this. All this work is done reverse applique. Here is one point where she starts adding bats to her quilts. She sees them as, I don't know, good luck or something. And a lot of people are intrigued with those. The one on the left, I noticed today, I just added it. And on the list, she has one called Flag, B-A-M, and it was made in 1934. So this is a new one that came to IQM. Now, B-A-M is her family initials, her name, excuse me, not her family, Bertha Amelia Meckstroth. So she made a flag quilt. She made 2 or 3 others, one for her sister, one for Radcliffe. And then this one is untitled at IQM, and it is probably from the 1930s. Now, did she make these herself? No, we don't think so. She apparently had quilt makers in Kentucky and Tennessee quilt these. And I think it's pretty evident with that really close cross stitch. It's very similar to Eastern Kentucky quilt makers, even those who worked on some of the contest quilts for the Sears one. So the one on the left, now I call Deer in Wedgwood. I don't think they've changed it yet. Maybe they have changed it, but she talks about the fact that she likes to experiment with the medium. She loved Wedgwood. She wanted to create that feeling through applique in making this quilt. And here, I love looking at newspapers.com. Here is Bertha in 1947. Remember, she died in 1960, and she's here giving her talk called Unusual Quiltings. And there is the quilt, but I'm not sure which one. Well, she made 3 copies. This one in 1935, here she is again with a quilt, showing it to, I think in this case, she was up in Minneapolis. It was her hometown, her home state. And then finally, here she is, or here's an article written after she has passed away. And it's a discussion of the quilts. Finally, the wheel has been settled, and the quilts that have been given to the Barrett College of the Sacred Heart in Lake Forest, Illinois, are displaying their quilts at a shopping center. And it was advertised or discussed in the Chicago Tribune. So, Katie, congratulations. I think, what do you think?
This is fascinating. So I remember when we pulled the Bertha Meckstroth quilt out, and I can't remember if it was because you were coming to visit or someone else was visiting, or we had a photograph for some reason, but there was a reason to pull it out, and I'd never thought about it. because I hadn't thought much about her whitework quilts, and you know, they're tough to photograph, and so you really do have to see them in person. But I remember being fascinated by Bertha and learning about how her collection got split.
Right.
And then I wondered, I mean, because she seems, you know, as a museum person, she seems like an obvious choice for a museum exhibition to think about her work. And I wondered, one, if anything like that has been done. It sounds like most of the examples that you found are at the IQSM.
Yeah.
I also can I just add this in here? Her initials were BAM, which is amazing. I wish I had initials like that. But I'm so interested, and it was as you were explaining about how she designed these, but perhaps farmed out the making of them.
Yes.
At first, I was totally with Barbara, and I was like, oh man. And then I started thinking about it. She's a trained sculptor, right?
Right.
And when you think about studio practices, if you are working in stone or clay or you're casting things, you're always modeling, but then farming or most of the time, there are exceptions. If you think about like Antonia Lewis and so on, but like most of the time, you're farming out the production of that model to a stonemason or someone else who is technically able.
Right.
And so thinking about her sort of sculptures in cloth like that, it starts to make sense. She absolutely should have a show. We should find an institution that can have a show like this. We should do that. I'll look at that.
Yeah, not
Wait
all.
a minute.
Not
You've got
all
an
the-
institution.
Not all the quilts are. That's the problem. I mean, there's
Right.
Bertha, the woman. Bertha, kind of a trendsetter,
Yeah.
and the people that she knew. She knew Isadora Duncan in that kind of time period there. She went to Radcliffe at a really early age. The Radcliffe papers are, I think, just now being opened. That her class is
Now
included in. And I mean, and then there's the quilts. And the quilts, the designs might be interesting. They might be hard to understand. I can't, well, it would make an interesting exhibit, but I'm not sure what you'd focus on.
Well, so
You don't like the Merikay. You just don't like
I
them.
you
love
don't
that
like
white
them.
one.
Did you look at them?
I love that white one, that blue,
Just imagine what it looked like on a bed. And that's what quilts were for, you know. That white one that it's in the Shelburne must have looked gorgeous on a bed.
no, the one I do like now, the Shelburne one. What is the one I really like is the blue and white one, the reindeer one, the wedge.
Reindeer. It's hard to imagine how she communicated
Yeah,
everything to the makers.
right.
I mean, all those letters. All those
And
letters. I can
very
see
fine
quilting.
quilting.
And the faces, faces are hard to do in applique, and it depended, some are not very well done.
Well, she
Two
probably had a range of
questions.
people.
Does Radcliffe still have the half that they were given?
No, I think it was,
Mm.
do you remember, Julie?
I don't really know. What I do know is that before they went to IQM, those 14 quilts were not offered to me. Whoever the woman was came to me and said, "Can you help me place these?" And I have to admit that I've said this to you guys before. They give me the creeps. They give me the creeps. I mean,
Well, and I think I did.
Wait. Why did they give you the creep?
I don't know why they give me the creeps, but it might
They're
have.
pious. We're not pious women.
No, but they actually give me the creeps. And I think, listen, when those quilts were offered to me, I did not know her story. I didn't know anything about her, but somehow I'm not at all surprised that she ended up in a mental institution. And I wonder when the bats
Most sculptors
appeared.
do.
When did the bats appear? About the time that she was,
Patty.
it's such a complicated subject because the idea of women going to mental institutions is so fraught. and what, how crazy was she, and what kind of crazy was she, and did she really belong in an institution? But I can just tell you that I have a visceral, I like most quilts. These just give me the creeps.
Well, these are 2-color quilts only. I was trying to kind of, I think that's unusual. I mean, we haven't seen a lot of her quilts in color, but I think the ones I've seen are 2-color, really just 1 color in white.
Yeah.
And the applique faces are hard. I think and I am the one who can, I told IQM that they really should get all those quilts. I think Jonathan Holstein encouraged them also to get all of them. I think their day will come. And interestingly, Mary Fons is very interested in Bertha Stang. She asked for,
Bertha Meckstroth.
Did I say Stangy or not? We should say that there are 2 Berthas in Chicago, and this is Bertha, not the quilt maker, not the one who won all the contests. Bertha Meckstroth was making quilts, lecturing, and maybe she got into a little tangle. Maybe she was a suburban woman, and maybe it was the city women in Chicago didn't particularly like her. I don't know, but I think it's interesting that last 1978 article in the newspaper, whoever's writing it says that she mentioned it often, that she had given that talk at the Century of Progress. It wasn't necessary for her to say that, but she did need to be propped up in a lot of ways. And she did, she was a quilt lecturer all over the Chicago area. And
how did her papers end up in
I don't know. That is where I started going down that rabbit hole. That's what I mean. And that was about 10 years ago when I did that. I think it's a nephew of the woman who was being interviewed by Joyce Gross in her article in 1981 was an alumna of Radcliffe. And she knew this, she mentions this nephew, and I think his name was Lewis. And I don't know how I tried to track him and find out where he lived, but
it's very interesting that they would accept it, considering doesn't seem to be any connection.
Oh, wait just a second. Helen Keller is the connection, I think.
Oh, wow.
Helen Keller, we underestimate. Someday all of Helen Keller is going to come out, I think, her life.
I know a lot about Helen Keller.
She lived in Florence, Alabama, which was not that, it's down in the, I'm not positive, but I think that
might be the connection.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, that's interesting.
I have to stop us, you guys. I'm very, very sorry. We've gone longer than we usually do. I hope that people
Good luck, Tara.
Good luck, Katie. Yeah. Katie.
Yeah, what?
Well, Katie, in the end, what do you feel like? Do you feel like you got some new information or too much?
Yeah. Listen, I would have drinks with you ladies any day to talk about quilts, but I have to say I had been thinking about the Meckstroth quilt a little bit in the past, and then you were like, oh, I'm interested in this, and I thought, oh, okay, it's worth another visit. Her story is really interesting, and now I'm even more intrigued because she gives Julie the creeps. But that is fascinating. I feel good about where I'm at with our New York album quilt. Thank you, Debbie. If I'm going to bring an album quilt to a group, it's this group. And so I'll sort of keep working on that. But no, this has been what I've really enjoyed, is getting in these last few minutes to talk with you all and see the different approaches that you all use for how you think about things. Our brains are all different, right? So it's great.
Thank you so much for joining us, Katie, and letting us take a closer look at your collection. And it's just been great to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I wanted to mention that we are going to take the month of July off, so we will see you all in August. And we're really enjoying this idea of going to a museum and each picking a favorite quilt. We'll probably continue doing that, mixed in with other kinds of themes and sometimes a potpourri. So thanks for joining us, everybody. And again, Katie, it was wonderful having you. Thanks so much.
Yes, thanks for coming.
Bye.
See you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Did you know you can watch our previous episodes on Vimeo? Vimeo.com/quiltdistrict/VOD_pages. Or you can search for the 6 know-it-alls when you go to the main page of Vimeo.com. You can also catch our first 3 episodes, which are free, on our YouTube channel. You can go directly to our YouTube channel, or you can go to youtube.com and search for the 6 know-it-alls. You can also find all the updates and links to previous episodes on quiltdistrict.com. Go to quiltdistrict.com and then the 6 know-it-alls tab, and there you'll find all the upcoming episode information, as well as the background on how the 6 know-it-alls got started and some biography information on all of the know-it-alls. You'll also want to be sure you put your email address in here so that you can get notified of upcoming events straight to your email inbox.
And I'm harping on this because lighting is so important to understanding the seasonal rhythms of quilting in this early period and why it began to change in the 19th century.
But that's not the way we use it, just to stick it in there. And so often you will find some turkey red pieces just put in there for a little flair. Even this one has a little bit of red down there, although that's a wool.
This is one quilt that I wanted to talk about today because we just were able to add it to the collection last year. Yeah, it was on loan for many years from the family. And some of you know the quilt maker Anna Catherine, known as Catherine Hummel Markey Garnhart of Frederick, Maryland. And thanks to my predecessor, Nancy Gibson, we now know of 10 quilts made by Markey Garnhart. And we now own 3.
Yes. Yes. And that is very interesting that it's made for the wife of a minister. And I have never heard of the ladies sewing group being called a circle of industry. So that's quite interesting. And I wonder if it belongs to that denomination, if there are others that call themselves something similar.
So I just wanted to show how the designs of these bed rugs relate to whole cloth quilt and other types of quilts. So here we have one of the foot bed rugs, and here we have a whole cloth quilt that was made by Olive Curtis Baker in Connecticut. And the stitching of this whole cloth quilt is basically pretty much the same idea as you see in the bed rug.
The thing is, and this goes back to Lynn too with the bed rugs. If we were looking at men's work, if we were looking at ceramics like graffiti plates or painted chests, we wouldn't be thinking of it as a hobby.